Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we have our 69th deck tech for the Commander's Guild, and it is titled Mutation Station, which I think is a pretty nice name for this episode. And if you haven't seen this show before, what we are doing is randomly selecting a card from Scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a Commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. Now, really quickly, before we get into all of the details for the deck, I do want to apologize a bit for my voice. I had a tooth extracted earlier this week, so my mouth isn't quite back up to its normal operating systems, but still able to record. I might just sound a little off, so I appreciate y'all for bearing with me on this one, but it shouldn't affect the video at all. Just wanted to make sure we had that cleared up before we move on. So, with that all being said, let's get into some business before we get to the deck tech. If you are interested in following us on social media, you can find us over on Twitter at 13POYNZ, Reddit u/POYNZ13, email dungeonlearnersguide@gmail.com. All of those are great ways to reach out to us. I try to respond to as many people as I can. We get a ton of suggestions from these different locations. We get a ton of interaction, and some people have even joined some of the games because of the interactions I've had with them. So if that's something you're interested in doing, please do reach out and let me know. Otherwise, if you are interested in supporting our content a little bit more directly, you can head on over to TCG Player using our affiliate link in the description of this video. And once you've done that, any cards that you purchase, anything you buy from their website, we get a little bit of a kickback from, just as a thank you for sending them some business. And then finally, we have the most direct way you could support our content, and that is through our Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide. That is a great way to support what we are doing and the videos that we are creating. And right now, any of the money we get through that is looking into ways to record videos in person, trying to get some games that are happening in person, get some of the equipment for that. And you do get some great benefits from that as well. You get access to the deck lists a whole week early. You get access to a Discord channel where we talk about building some of the decks, and we play some games, and we have a great community over there. Some awesome people are involved. And last but not least, you could also get access to, at the very top of this, the unedited gameplay videos, so you can hear the player's commentary rather than just my own, as well as a free card from our random cards of the week every single week. I'll send you one of those every month. So if that is something that you are interested in doing, like I said, please do check out patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide. And if none of that is quite your style, you can always just like this video, subscribe to the channel. That really does help out a lot. We just recently passed 250 subscribers, so thank you to all of you for joining us on this journey. Oh, and of course, before we move on, we do have to shout out our current patrons as well. We do have William Swiftfoot, Doodle, and Observer Will. Thank you so much to the three of you for all of the support you give us. And without any further ado, I suppose let's jump into the deck tech itself. So, first up, our random card of the week was a suggested card from Consideration No 5636 over on Reddit, and the suggested card was Essence of the Wild. So Essence of the Wild is 3 green, green, green for a 6/6 creature avatar, and it says creatures you control enter the battlefield as a copy of Essence of the Wild. So this is a super unique card because it means that all of our creatures are coming in as 6/6 creatures. So we could play this as a token style deck. We could be playing this as a copy style deck or just like a ramp style deck. And so to give you an idea of what we may be doing without giving too much of a spoiler, let's talk about the commander for this deck. And we are in 3 colors this week. This is a teamer deck, so blue, green, and red. And our commander is Illuna, Apex of Wishes, which is 2 green, blue, red for a 6/6 legendary creature beast elemental dinosaur. It has flying and trample, and whenever this creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land permanent card, put that card onto the battlefield or into your hand. Plus, it has mutate for 3 and a hybrid red-green, blue-blue. So if we mutate it, we get to put it over or under target non-human creature you own. They mutate into the creature on top, plus all abilities from under it. So Illuna could mutate, for example, on top of Essence of the Wild, and then it would have all the abilities. So it would have flying, trample, whenever it mutates, exile cards. and it would make all other creatures come into play as a copy of that card. So I think you might kind of see what we're doing here. Our goal is to mutate Illuna, or maybe something else, onto Essence of the Wild so that every creature comes in as a copy of the mutated stack, not just Essence of the Wild. So, with that being said, we can take a look at some of our themes for this deck. And the first one is Mutate. We do want to have a ton of different Mutate creatures because we want our Essence of the Wild to be turning other things into huge, monstrous creatures with a ton of abilities. So, for example, we have Auspicious Sterix, which is 4 and a green for a 6/6 elk beast. Whenever this creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile X permanent cards, where X is the number of times this creature has mutated. Put those permanent cards onto the battlefield, and it mutates for 5 and a green. So we have a ton of different mutate cards in this deck. Auspicious Sterix kind of benefits us, getting us free things for mutating. We have other mutate spells that draw us cards or steal things from our opponents or destroy things or make tokens, whatever it may be. So we have a ton of utility in our mutate spells, which can then hopefully be copied with Essence of the Wild because we want to mutate onto it and then copy it. And with that being said, of course, our second theme is going to be creatures to mutate onto. We need to make sure that we have non-humans in the deck to mutate onto. Essence of the Wild is 1 out of 99 cards in our deck. There's a solid chance we may not have access to it. So that's where things like Avenger of Zendikar come into play, which is 5 green for a 5/5 elemental. When Avenger of Zendikar enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land you control. And landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. So if we mutate Auspicious Sterix on top of Avenger of Zendikar, we would still get both abilities of both creatures. Plus, Avenger is now a 6/6. A huge benefit to mutating onto targets like this is that we get all of the abilities, but at the same time with things like Avenger, it's also making tokens. So if we're able to get Avenger of Zendikar and mutate something onto it, and then use our third theme, which is copying things, we could technically make a copy of not just Avenger of Zendikar, but a mutated Avenger of Zendikar, meaning each time that new copy came into play, we would be getting more and more plant tokens. And then, whenever we would play a land, if we had 3 Avengers of Zendikar, that one land puts 3 +1/+1 counters on all of our plants. So this can get out of hand very quickly because we're mutating onto massive creatures, preferably Essence of the Wild, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And then getting these enter the battlefield effects, getting these mutate triggers, and then using something like Mythos of Illuna to copy those creatures. So we can make token copies of those permanents. So Mythos of Illuna is 2 blue for a sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target permanent. If red and green was spent to cast this spell, instead create a token that's a copy of that permanent, except the token has, when this permanent enters the battlefield, if it's a creature, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So Mythos of Illuna in this deck could be a copy spell, but it can also be a removal spell because a lot of our stuff is super big. Avenger is a 5/5, Sterix is a 6/6, Illuna is a 6/6, Essence is a 6/6. We can pretty much use that to remove most creatures on the board, plus copy something, get a relevant enter the battlefield effect like with Avenger, maybe get an extra mutate target or a mutate effect depending on the creature that we target, or maybe even just getting a very nice copy of our opponent's things. This doesn't have to target our own things. So Mythos of Illuna is a great card, great to be able to have the utility as a removal, a copy effect, whatever we need it to be in the moment. So those are the themes for this week's deck. And that does, of course, lead us into our key cards. These are the cards that work super well with what we're trying to do and synergize and really help us win. These are kind of our game plan here. So our first key card is going to be Illuna Wild Mage. And I feel like Illuna shows up in a lot of the decks I make for this channel, but that might just be a testament to how good this card really is. She is 3 and a red for a 3/2 legendary creature, Elf Shaman. Whenever Illuna Wild Mage attacks, choose target creature you control, then roll a d20. If you roll a 1 through 14, you create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary, and it has exile this creature at the end of combat. If you roll a 15 to 20, you create one of those tokens and then roll again. So Illuna can create copies of our permanents every single turn. And this is super, super important because we need to make sure that we have repeating ways to make copies of our creatures. Essence of the Wild makes a copy every time we play a creature. Illuna makes a copy every time we go to combat. So if we can guarantee that we have a great target, something like Avenger of Zendikar, even Avenger of Zendikar that may have been mutated onto a couple of times, we're guaranteed to get at least one copy, possibly even more. So Illuna is an amazing way to get those multiple triggers in one turn and to guarantee that we can get those copies every single turn, because that's what we want to be doing. If we're not copying something every turn, or we're using a spell as like a one-off way to do it, we're not super happy with that. So Illuna, absolutely perfect for what we're trying to do. A super powerful card, and honestly probably deserves a slot in most red decks at this point. I think almost every red deck I play seems to have Illuna in it for some reason, so definitely worth the slot. And then moving on to our second key card, we have Cursed Mirror, which is very similar to Illuna in the sense that it's going to make a copy of something, but it does it in a very unique way. So Cursed Mirror is 2 and a red for an artifact. It taps to add a red mana, and as Cursed Mirror enters the battlefield, you may have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield until end of turn, except it has haste. So this is a 3 mana, hasty clone effect, and yeah, the clone effect goes away at the end of turn, but that's okay, because we still get the enter the battlefield effect. We have haste, so we get the attack trigger if it has one, and after that, it just becomes a mana rock, which is perfect. So Cursed Mirror can really surprise people out of nowhere, because if we're attacking with something like, say, Auspicious Sterix, which is a 6/6, and we just drop Cursed Mirrors, so all of a sudden we have another 3 mana 6/6 with haste, we might just be able to get some people. And like I said, even once all that's over, we've gotten our value of it. Now it's just a mana rock, which is phenomenal. And if at any point we're able to bounce it back to our hand, recast it, or if we're able to copy it, we can do that again and again. So Cursed Mirror is absolutely phenomenal. I absolutely love this card, and I don't get the chance to play it as much as I would like to, so I am very happy to see it show up in this deck. And finally, our last key card for the deck is Rite of Replication. You know we're not playing a clone deck without Rite of Replication. It's 2 blue for a sorcery. Put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of target creature. If Rite of Replication was kicked, put 5 of those tokens onto the battlefield instead, and of course it has kicker for 5. So for 4 mana, we get to copy one thing 1 time. For 9 mana, we get to copy one thing 5 times. So for example, if we copy Avenger of Zendikar with Rite of Replication 5 times, we now have 5 Avengers of Zendikar. Each of them is going to make that many tokens depending on the amount of lands we have, and each land we play is going to put 5 +1/+1 counters on every single plant we have. That is absolutely devastating for the rest of the table, and it's not the only target in the deck. Of course, there's other things. We have our mutate targets, we have things like that. So Rite of Replication is a great way to copy stuff, whether it's for 4 mana and copying it once, or 9 mana to copy it 5 times. So Rite of Replication, always a key card in any deck it shows up in, and I'm very happy that at this point it's been reprinted enough times that it's just under $3, because this is a super, super powerful card, and I'm very happy we can include it in some of our budget decks. But those are all of the key cards for this deck, and the next piece of this is, of course, to take a look at some cool interactions, some cards that synergize super well specifically with each other. And our first cool interaction for this deck is going to be between Scute Swarm and Migratory Greathorn. So Scute Swarm, 2 and a green for a creature insect. It's a 1/1. It's got landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scute Swarm instead. Now, like I've been talking about this whole time, if we are mutating onto something and then copying it, the copy is also the mutated creature. It's not just the base creature. So if we mutate something like Migratory Greathorn onto Scute Swarm, and it copies itself with its landfall ability, we're not just copying Scute Swarm, we are copying Scute Swarm plus Migratory Greathorn. And that becomes relevant because Migratory Greathorn is 3 and a green for a creature, beast, 3/4. Whenever this creature mutates, search your library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library, and it mutates for 2 and a green. So if we have 6 lands in play, and we have a Scute Swarm, and we mutate Migratory Greathorn onto Scute Swarm, that automatically triggers the mutate ability. It goes to get a basic land. Now we have 2 Migratory Greathorn Scute Swarms. So if we were to, say, mutate onto the Migratory Greathorn, then all of a sudden we get another land. That triggers both of the Migratory Greathorns. That goes and gets us 2 more Migratory Greathorn Scute Swarms. And every single time we play a land, we are getting more and more Scute Swarms. And we don't even have to have a land in our hand. We can just mutate onto Migratory Greathorn, triggering the Scute Swarm, getting a land, making more and more Scute Swarms. Plus, we now no longer have an army of 1/1s, we have an army of 3/4s, which is significantly more threatening. So these 2 cards on their own are incredibly powerful and exactly what we want to be doing with this deck, but combined, this can end a game in just a couple of turns. So very, very cool interaction, very powerful interaction. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see this combination win some games once in a while. Now, moving on to our second cool interaction for the deck, we have Cold-Eyed Selkie and Archipelagore. Now, admittedly, we could replace Archipelagore with any mutate threat. However, I wanted to put Archipelagore because it is the biggest mutate threat. So, Cold-Eyed Selkie, 1 and a hybrid Simic for a 1/1 creature Merfolk Rogue, has Island Walk, and whenever Cold-Eyed Selkie deals combat damage to a player, you may draw that many cards. So if we hit someone with Cold-Eyed Selkie, it's a 1/1, we draw 1 card. However, if we mutate onto it with Archipelagore, which is 5 blue for a 7/7, mutates for 5 and a blue, it's a Leviathan. Whenever this creature mutates, tap up to X target creatures, where X is the number of times this creature is mutated. Those creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap step. Yeah, the mutate trigger is great. It taps things, which is super useful. But the really important part of this is that Cold-Eyed Selkie is now a 7/7 creature. So when it deals combat damage, we draw 7 cards. That is every single turn, especially if there's an opponent with islands, because then Cold-Eyed Selkie can't be blocked. And if for some reason we're at a table where no one has islands, then the Archipelagore's mutate trigger really comes in handy because it taps down our opponent's creatures, letting us get in with the Cold-Eyed Selkie, do the combat damage, draw some cards, hopefully drawing some mutate creatures, mutating onto Archipelagore, and tapping down more and more and more creatures until eventually we just win the game. So a super powerful combination, and again, these are great cards on their own, but they really shine together because all of the mutate creatures need targets. We need to be able to mutate them onto other things, and Cold-Eyed Selkie is a phenomenal target for that. But that is the majority of the deck tech. Obviously, the last piece of this that we got to talk about is the budget, because this is a budget deck tech. So this week, our deck came in at $76.53. Pretty good, about 3/4 of our budget. And a good portion of that actually came from one specific card, which is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. And Fable of the Mirror Breaker is a saga, 2 and a red. For the first trigger on the saga, we get a 2/2 red Goblin Shaman creature token with, whenever this creature attacks, you make a treasure token, which is a great copy target, by the way. Level 2, you may discard up to 2 cards. If you do, draw that many cards. Perfect, we want to be looting. And number 3, exile this saga, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. And when it transforms, it comes back into play as Reflection of Kiki Jiki, which is a 2/2 enchantment creature, Goblin Shaman. You can pay 1, tap, create a token that's a copy of another target non-legendary creature you control, except it has haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Just like we talked about earlier with Illuna, it's super, super powerful and super, super important for this deck to be able to make token copies, or just copies in general, every single turn. So Reflection of Kiki Jiki lets us do that. Yeah, it costs a mana, we gotta tap it, but it gives us a creature with haste. And that is super relevant. And the nice thing about this is, even though it has to make a copy of a non-legendary creature, the way that Mutate works is if we mutate on top of a legendary creature, like Illuna, it's no longer legendary. So all we've got to do is copy that, and we get all of the effects of that creature. So with this, we could technically get multiple copies of Illuna, because Illuna can be mutated onto, weirdly enough, she's an elf, not a human, so it doesn't count. Mutate onto a Illuna, and then she's no longer legendary. We make copies of her. Each of those copies trigger separately. We could, in a perfect world, make an infinite number of copies of Illuna. Now, we would have to get super, super, super lucky with dice rolls, but it's not impossible. With that being said, though, there are a ton of other targets in the deck as well. So it is understandable that Fable of the Mirror Breaker is a $9 card right now, especially because it's not only seeing play in Commander, but it's a Standard All-Star, it's a Pioneer All-Star. I've even seen decks playing it as far back as Modern, so a very powerful card. If you are looking to trim down the price, this is a card you could cut, because obviously $9 trims you down to about $67, which is much more manageable. However, if you have the space for it or the budget for it, I do highly recommend it, because it is a super powerful card. Plus, it gives you that goblin token that makes treasures, so that is a great mutate target. It's a great copy target. This card really does everything we want to be doing in this deck, and I can't hype it up enough. Now, with all of that being said, if you are looking to increase the price of this deck, because we do have $24 worth of space that we didn't play with, you could throw in some other cards. Now, I personally chose not to include these cards, even though I probably could have with the budget, because I wanted to keep it as low as possible, but we do have some out-of-budget upgrades to suggest. The first of which is going to be Spark Double, which could swap in for Mind Link Mech. So Spark Double is 3 and a blue for a 0/0 creature illusion. You may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, and it enters with an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker, and isn't legendary if that permanent is legendary. So Spark Double is an amazing card in this deck because it does what we want to be doing. It copies our creatures, and it removes legendary if that permanent's legendary. So again, going back to our Illuna example, we could copy Illuna with Spark Double, and then any future copy effects could copy the Spark Double, which is a non-legendary version of Illuna, so those other copies could stick around. This is a great way to get around the legend rule and copy things that we probably shouldn't be able to copy, because it gets around certain effects. Now, like I said, I would recommend taking out Mind Link Mech for Spark Double for almost the same reason we want to put Spark Double in, honestly. Mind Link Mech is 2 and a blue for a 4/3 vehicle, has flying, and whenever it becomes crewed for the first time each turn, until end of turn, Mind Link Mech becomes a copy of target non-legendary creature that crewed it this turn, except it's a 4/3, it's a vehicle artifact in addition to its other types, and it has flying, crew 1. So, overall, this is a very good card, and I'm not recommending taking this out because I think it's bad. However, when we play this card, we don't copy something as it enters the battlefield. We don't get enter the battlefield effects. It only becomes a copy of it once it's crewed, which means it's already in play. It's not going to be something we really want to mutate onto because it's going to be very susceptible to removal, being an artifact, plus being a creature. We have to crew it, so we don't necessarily want to be crewing our mutate creatures. So Mind Link Mech isn't the best at what we're trying to do, mainly because it's not entering as a copy. It's becoming a copy once it's crewed. That's the sticking point for this. It's not a bad card, but it doesn't quite fit what we're trying to do with this deck. So if you have the chance, I would recommend pulling in Spark Double and switching out Mind Link Mech, just because it's going to work better in this particular deck. Now, in a similar vein, we're going to move into our next out-of-budget upgrade, and it's almost the exact same reason that I just said. In this case, I would recommend switching in Sakashima of 1,000 Faces for Cyto Shape. So Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, 3 and a blue for legendary creature human rogue, 3/1. You may have Sakashima of 1,000 Faces enter the battlefield as a copy of another creature you control, except it has Sakashima of 1,000 Faces other abilities. The legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control, and partner. Now obviously we're not using Sakashima as a partner in this deck, but the other 2 abilities are great. So again, it is a clone effect, so we want to copy other things that we control, but it also doesn't let the legend rule apply. So we can copy our legends and not have any consequences of it. So for example, if we mutate Illuna on top of Essence of the Wild and then every other creature comes into play as a copy of Illuna, that is perfectly fine. We can do that. That's great. We have a board full of 6/6 flyers that have mutate triggers. Awesome. So that explains Sakashima's almost $19 price tag. It is a very powerful creature. However, to swap that out, I would recommend Cyto Shape, like I said, for a very similar reason that I would recommend swapping out Mindlink Mech, because Cyto Shape is 1 green, blue for an instant. Choose a non-legendary creature in play. Target creature becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn. Now, the nice thing about Cyto Shape is that it can be used on our opponent's creatures. We can take away something that they have and turn it into something else. However, that's not our main game plan. We don't want to be using this as a removal spell, especially because it's only until end of turn. So really, we would want to be casting this on one of our creatures to turn something else into a copy of it, which is great, but just like I mentioned with Mindlink Mech, it doesn't matter about the enter the battlefield effect. That creature is already in play. We gain nothing from doing this other than having another copy of something. Like maybe we need another Avenger so we can put more +1/+1 counters on our creatures. That would be awesome. However, it's not going to be super great in a lot of scenarios with this deck because we really want to get the enter the battlefield effect. We really want to get the attack triggers and things like that. And it's very difficult for us to turn one of our creatures into another creature because we want to be making token copies of it, not just shifting it to a different creature. So again, Cyto Shape is a phenomenal card, and I do recommend it in a lot of decks. However, I don't think this is the deck for it if you have the option of putting in Sakashima instead. Sakashima just does more for what we're aiming to do, and it does a lot more for this particular deck. However, those are all of the out-of-budget upgrades, so we'll move on from there. And of course, the last thing we've got to do for this deck, the very, very last thing, is see how it performs in a game. We are going to run this deck up against 3 different opponents this week. We have Kit Kanto Mayhem Diva being played by Mike. We have Mathis Fiend Seeker being played by Sorceress. And we have Tristani Selesnia's Voice being played by Bilal. So first up, Kit Kanto is a 100% out-of-the-box pre-constructed deck. Mike literally opened the box right as we were sitting down to play. He didn't even sleeve up the deck, so hopefully you don't mind non-sleeved decks playing games. And I would recommend maybe stick around to the end of the video because all of the commander decks come with a little mini collector's pack, so he opens that for us at the end of the game. So if you're interested in seeing what he got in his mini collector's pack, stick around to the end of the video and check that out. But this is, like I said, 100% the precon, so it's all about tokens, all about goading. He wants to make a ton of creatures, goad his opponent's creatures. And one thing that I want to pose as a question to everyone watching right now, because we were confused about this playing the game, Kit Kanto's second ability says at the beginning of combat on each player's turn, you may tap 2 untapped creatures you control. When you do, target creature that player controls gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn. Goad that creature. I believe the way that ability works is he can only tap 2 untapped creatures to goad something else. We were a little bit split on that at the table, so we played it that he could tap any number as long as it was in pairs of 2. So please let us know if that is how that ability works or if we misread it, because I would love to know for the future, because I expect Kit Kanto to be a regular mainstay in some of these games moving forward. Otherwise, though, I think that I'm very excited to see what this deck does. I think we'll do okay against it because we might be making less tokens, but our tokens should be bigger. So my hope is that we can kind of get in, and if it comes down to one-on-one, goad doesn't do much. So I think we can handle Kit Kanto. Next up, Mathis Fiend Seeker. This is Sorceress's build. Originally, she mentioned that it was similar to Group Slug, but that she didn't really like the term Group Slug, so it's more of like an aggressive group hug style strategy where she wants to help her opponents out, but she also wants to make sure that they're attacking players who are not her, so she can kind of last to the end and then sweep up the victory at the end. So I'm very excited to see how this deck works. I love Mathis, and I think it's a super unique build around. So I don't quite know how she's built it, but I am very excited to find out. And then, last but not least, we do have Bilal's Tristani Selesnia's Voice, which is all just about playing massive creatures and just gaining a ton of life. So I think out of all of the decks here, that is probably the one I'm most concerned about. I don't think we can keep up with the life gain, and I'm worried that his creatures are going to outpace us, especially because he just has Populate on his commander, which is a concern for us. So I think Tristani is the main one that I'm watching out for, but I don't know much about Mathis, so maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. We're going to find out. And before we jump into the actual game itself, a quick heads up. Mike was having some internet issues during this game, so you might notice his camera flickering a little bit in and out, but it's not too bad. It doesn't affect the game overall, and hopefully it's not too annoying to watch. But otherwise, I am very excited for this game. I hope you all are as well, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Mike goes first, followed by Sorceress, Bilal, and then myself. On Mike's first turn, he plays a Path of Ancestry. Sorceress plays a Temple of Silence, scrying 1. Bilal plays a Forest. I play a Colony Garden, making a 0/1 plant token, which will be represented by Spyro. Mike plays a Naya Panorama. Sorceress plays a Dross Forge Bridge. Bilal plays a Forest. I move straight to combat, attacking Mike for 0 to send a message, and then I play an Is It Boilerworks, returning Colony Garden to my hand. Then, at the end of turn, Mike sacrifices his Naya Panorama to search his library for a Plains and put it into play tapped. Mike plays a Game Trail on his turn, revealing a Cinderglade so it comes into play untapped. Sorceress plays a Vault of Champions and casts Temple Bell, which can be tapped to draw each player a card. Bilal plays a Forest and casts Springbloom Druid, sacrificing a forest when it enters to search his library for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped. I replay the Colony Garden, making another 0/1 plant token, this time represented by Elaine, and then at the end of turn, Mike casts Cabaretti Charm, creating 2 1/1 citizen tokens. On Mike's turn, he plays a Fortified Village, revealing the Cinderglade again so it comes into play untapped, and then casts his commander, Kit Kanto Mayhem Diva, creating another citizen token when she enters, and also allowing him to tap 2 creatures whenever a player goes to combat to goad target creature, and to give it +2/+2 and trample until the end of turn. Then, at the end of Mike's turn, Sorceress taps the Temple Bell, letting everyone draw a card. Sorceress plays the Plains and casts her commander, Mathis Fiendseeker, moving straight to her end step, triggering Mathis's ability, putting a bounty counter on Kit Kanto, allowing each player who doesn't control Kit to draw a card and gain 2 life when she dies. On Bilal's turn, he casts Wood Elves, searching his library for a Canopy Vista, putting it into play. With that, he casts Speaker of the Heavens, which can tap to create a 4/4 Angel token if he has 7 or more life than his starting life total. I play an Evolving Wilds and cast Cultivate, searching my library for 2 basic lands, putting one into play tapped and the other into my hand, and I also sacrifice Evolving Wilds to search my library for another basic land, putting it into play tapped. Then, when I move to combat, Mike taps all 4 of his creatures to give both of my plants +2/+2, trample, and goad them. This forces me to attack Sorceress and Bilal both for 2, and Sorceress blocks with Mathis, killing one of the plants, while Bilal takes 2 damage. Mike plays a Plains and casts Rumor Gatherer, scrying 1 whenever a creature enters under his control, and drawing a card if it's the second time this ability has resolved in a turn. Then at the end of turn, Sorceress activates the Temple Bell, drawing everyone a card. Sorceress plays a Windscarred Crag, gaining a life, and then casts Brina the Demagogue, allowing any player who attacks one of her opponents with a higher life than another opponent to draw a card, while Sorceress puts 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature she controls. When she moves to combat, Mike taps 2 creatures to goad Mathis, giving him +2/+2 in Trample. This forces Sorceress to attack me with her commander, triggering Brina, drawing a card, and putting 2 +1/+1 counters on Mathis, hitting me for 7 total commander damage. Then, at the end of turn, Mathis puts a bounty counter on Speaker of the Heavens. Bilal plays a Fabled Passage and casts Baneslayer Angel. He then sacrifices his Fabled Passage, searching his library for a Plains and putting it into play. On my turn, I play a Mountain and mutate my commander Illuna Apex of Wishes on top of my plant token, exiling cards from the top of my library until I exile a non-land permanent, putting that card into play. This results in me putting Phylath World Sculptor into play and making 3 plant tokens since I control 3 basic lands. These plants are represented by Nesta, Feyre, and Gwyn. When I move to combat, Mike goads my commander, giving it +2/+2 in Trample, forcing me to attack Sorceress for 8 commander damage. Mike plays a Myriad Landscape, and then casts a Sizzling Soloist, which prevents a creature from blocking whenever a creature enters under Mike's control, and also forces the targeted creature to attack if it's the second time that ability resolves in a turn. This also triggers Rumor Gatherer, letting him scry 1, and at the end of turn, Sorceress activates Temple Bell so everyone can draw a card. Sorceress plays a Swamp, and casts Kazul Tyrant of the Cliffs, making each opponent pay 3 mana when they attack her, or she gets to make a 3/3 Ogre token. When Sorceress goes to combat, Mike activates Kit Kanto, targeting Mathis, so she has to attack Bilal with Mathis, triggering Brina, putting 2 counters on Brina, drawing a card, and hitting Bilal for 7 commander damage. Then, at the end of turn, she puts a bounty counter on Illuna. Bilal plays a Forest and casts Ajani Great-Hearted, giving all his creatures Vigilance. He immediately activates Ajani's -2 ability, putting a +1/+1 counter on each of his creatures. When Bilal moves to combat, Mike activates Kit Kanto, targeting Baneslayer Angel. This makes Bilal attack Sorceress with the Angel for 8, not paying for Kazul, so Sorceress creates an Ogre token. Then Bilal gains 8 life when it deals damage thanks to lifelink. On my turn, I play an Island, triggering Phylath and letting me put 4 +1/+1 counters on Illuna since she's technically a plant thanks to the mutation. After that, I cast Explosive Vegetation, searching my library for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped, triggering Phylath twice, and putting 8 more +1/+1 counters onto Illuna. After that, I mutate Porcuparrot under Illuna, triggering Illuna, exiling cards from the top of my library until I exile a non-land permanent, putting it into play. This results in Imposter Mech coming into play as a copy of Kit Kanto, creating me a citizen token. Then, when I move to combat, Mike activates his Kit Kanto, targeting Illuna. This means I have to attack Bilal for 18 with my commander, but I do still attack Mike for 5. This also triggers Brina, drawing me a card and putting 2 counters on Brina. Mike plays a Thriving Bluff, naming green when it enters, and then casts Fibine's Boss Confident, giving all his creature tokens haste and also making each player reveal the top card of their library when he goes to combat, making Mike a citizen token for each land revealed, giving his creatures +1/+0 until end of turn for each non-land, and then letting players draw a card. This also triggers his creatures, scrying 1 and preventing Wood Elves from blocking. Then he moves to combat, triggering Fabine, revealing 2 lands and 2 non-lands, making 2 citizens and giving his team +2/+2 until the end of turn. When the citizens enter the battlefield, he draws a card, scries 1, and forces the Wood Elves to attack next turn. I also activate my Kit Kanto, targeting Mike's Kit Kanto, forcing him to attack Bilal for 7 with his commander, and me for 24 with the rest of his creatures. This triggers Brina, drawing Mike a card, and letting Sorceress put 2 more counters on Brina. Then, I block Rumor Gatherer with my plant token, taking only 19 damage, but killing my token, while Bilal blocks with his entire board except Wood Elves, casting Heroic Intervention before damage can be dealt to give his permanents hexproof and indestructible, gaining 6 life and killing Kit Kanto, which allows Sorceress, Bilal, and I to all gain 2 life and draw a card thanks to the bounty counter on her. Then, at the end of turn, Sorceress activates Temple Bell to let each player draw a card. Sorceress plays a Thriving Moor, naming red, casts a Curse of Disturbance on Mike, which allows any person to attack him to make a 2/2 zombie, and Sorceress also gets to make one, activates Temple Bell again, and then also casts a Ghostly Prison, making each opponent pay 2 to attack her. Then, when she moves to the end of turn, she puts a bounty counter on Baneslayer Angel. Bilal plays a Fortified Village, revealing a plane so that it comes into play untapped, and casts Nykthos Paragon, allowing him to put X +1/+1 counters on all of his creatures, where X is the amount of life he gains, but only once per turn. He then attacks me with 3 creatures and Mike with 1. When Baneslayer Angel hits me with First Strike, Bilal gains 6 life, and thanks to Nykthos Paragon, puts 6 +1/+1 counters on all of his creatures. This allows him to hit me for an additional 16 damage with his other 2 creatures, knocking me out of the game, and also hits Mike for 8, gaining another 8 life. He also triggers Brina, drawing a card and letting Sorceress put 2 counters on Brina. And finally, when he moves to his second main phase, he activates a Johnny's +1 ability, gaining 3 life. Mike plays a command tower and recasts his commander Kit Kanto, creating another citizen token, scrying 1 twice, and preventing Baneslayer Angel from blocking as well as forcing it to attack. When he moves to combat, Fabine triggers, revealing a land and 2 non-lands, making Mike another citizen, giving his team +2/+2 and drawing a card. He then attacks Bilal for 3 with a citizen, triggering Brina, so Mike draws a card and Sorceress puts 2 counters on Brina. Before Bilal can block, in an attempt to prevent his board from growing any bigger, Mike casts Path to Exile on the Nykthos Paragon, exiling it and allowing Bilal to search his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. Then Bilal takes the 3 damage, and Mike passes. In Sorceress's upkeep, she activates Temple Bell, drawing each player a card, and then casts a Ruinous Ultimatum, destroying all non-land permanents she doesn't control. This removes 2 of Bilal's creatures with bounty counters, so Mike and Sorceress both draw 2 cards and gain 4 life. She then moves to combat, attacking Bilal for 22 damage with all of her creatures, including 5 from Mathis. In her second main phase, she plays a Terramorphic Expanse, sacrificing it to search her library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. On Bilal's turn, he casts his commander, Tristani Selesnia's Voice, allowing him to gain life equal to the toughness of every creature that enters under his control. He then casts Evra Halcyon Witness, which can be activated to swap their power with Bilal's life total, gaining 4 life from Tristani. On Mike's turn, he recasts his commander, Kit Kanto, making another citizen token. Sorceress plays a Myriad Landscape, and casts Captive Audience, giving it to Bilal. Then, when Sorceress goes to combat, Mike activates Kit Kanto, targeting Brina. This forces her to attack Bilal with Brina, but she does attack Mike with her Ogre token and Kazul. This triggers Brina, letting her draw a card and put 2 counters on Brina, hitting Bilal for 13 and Mike for 9. Then, at the end of turn, she puts a bounty counter on Tristani. In Bilal's upkeep, he's forced to give each opponent 5 2/2 zombie tokens thanks to the Captive Audience, and when he moves to combat, Mike activates Kit Kanto, tapping 4 of his newly created zombies to target both of Bilal's creatures. In response, Bilal activates Evfra, swapping his life total with its power. However, because Sorceress has a ghostly prison, Bilal opts not to pay when he attacks, meaning his creatures can't attack her, resulting in him being unable to attack this turn. He then moves to his second main phase and casts Rishkar's Expertise, drawing 10 cards since he controls a creature with 10 power, and then casting a spell mana value 5 or less from his hand for free. This lets him cast Angel of Destiny, gaining 6 life and returning to 10 life. Then he plays a Bountiful Promenade and casts Llanowar Elves, gaining yet another life. Mike plays a Windbrisk Heights, hiding away a card, and then casts Intangible Virtue, giving his creature tokens +1/+1 and Vigilance. After that, he casts Orzhov Advocist, allowing each player to put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control in Mike's upkeep, but if they do, they can't attack him on their next turn. He also casts a Magus of the Wheel, and at the end of turn, Sorceress activates her Temple Bell, letting everyone draw a card. On Sorceress's turn, she plays a Swamp and then activates Temple Bell, drawing everyone a card, and when she moves to combat, Mike taps 6 creatures for Kit Kanto, targeting Kazul, Mathis, and Brina. This forces Sorceress to attack Bilal with those 3 creatures for 29 damage, and Bilal, rather than lose his entire board, decides not to block, getting knocked out of the game. On Mike's turn, he sacrifices Magus of the Wheel to make each player discard their hand and draw 7 cards. And then, when Sorceress untaps, she immediately activates her Temple Bell, drawing each player a card, plays a Plains, and then moves to combat. And once in combat, she casts Master Warcraft, choosing which creatures attack and block this turn and how they attack and block. This allows her to attack Mike with all of her creatures for 34 damage, saying his creatures don't block this turn, winning Sorceress the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Definitely very happy to see all of the decks kind of do what they wanted to do. Bilal couldn't quite keep a board at any time, but he definitely had a couple of threats on board very early. Did a ton of damage with that Baneslayer plus the Nykthos, so unfortunately had to be on the receiving end of that. Our deck was doing pretty much what we wanted. We had a massive commander, we were making some copies, mutating, it was super cool, glad to see it do what it wanted to do, and I mentioned to Bilal as he killed us at the end that I did have Flame and Dualcaster Mage in my hand when Bilal killed us. That is an infinite combo, it would have won the game, but Bilal didn't know that. He still definitely made the right choice in killing us at that point, because even not knowing our hand, we had an 18 power commander on the board, and we had just hit him for 18, so we were threatening lethal. Also, I realized at the end, again, just like earlier with Kit Kanto, I'm not 100% sure if I'm allowed to put counters on Illuna, even though she mutated on top of a plant. I don't know if it erases the identity of the other cards in the stack, so if you know the answer to that, please let me know. I would love to know if we did that right or if I had messed that up. There was a lot of triggers happening in this game. There was a lot going on, so I'm sure some mistakes were made, some new cards, Mutate especially, a little bit confusing. So let me know what you think, if we did the right thing or maybe not, so that way we can improve for the future. Otherwise, the other decks at the table, Kit Kanto, out of the box, very, very powerful. I was very impressed with Kit Kanto, and I think that the Goad style strategy also very strong. I think that Mike could have definitely won the game if he had been allowed to keep his board, but the board wipe from Sorceress really set him back and put him in a losing position. And then Sorceress's Mathis deck really put in a ton of work. I'm very impressed by how it performed. And if you are interested in her deck, she did give me the deck list to her Mathis deck, so that will be in the description of the video below. And otherwise, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Hope you enjoyed the game and the deck tech. If you have suggestions for future cards that you would like to see turned into decks, or just future suggestions for content in general, please do let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.
Alright, let's see what we get from this is.
Yeah, good luck, Mike.
You got a dragon.
I'll see you.
Yeah, we'll see you, Sorceress. Thanks for joining.
Well,
Thank
this
you.
is Streets. Oh, what a load of bumpkins. Oh my gosh, that is such a robbery.
The hearse is fun. It's just not that great.
No, this is the Horde Hauler.
Or yeah, that's the one I mean. The hearse is much better.
Deals combat damage to a player. Create a treasure token for each artifact they control. And then Racer's Ring, which is just a
Tap land.
It's a tap land.